which are the kind of Indian businesses that are affected most here? So India Post has said we are not going to be sending parcels to the US. Why did that happen?
For a shipping company, this is significant additional responsibility, not financially, because they will ultimately need to recover it from their customer. So the Indian exporter who's shipping this will ultimately, unfortunately, have to pay all of this. But a company like India Post still needs to take that money and pay it to the US government, to the relevant department, in an itemized way against each item. They need to know how to make this payment. They need to make sure they're complying with each and every rule and so on. The world is also, learning and working with this new way
World
in which
order.
the US, this new world order and this new way in which the US is managing its international relations.
From In Focus, this is Tariff Watch. We bring you this special series on the new US tariffs, their impact on Indian industries, and the people whose lives are being reshaped by them. So please, continue listening.
This is In Focus, and I am Anupama Chandrasekaran. For decades, the United States had a trade rule called the de minimis exemption. It allowed small, low-value parcels to enter duty-free in the US. It began at just $1, stayed there for decades, then slowly crept up $5 in 1990 and $200 in 1993. Then in 2016, a big jump, $800, one of the most generous thresholds in the world. For comparison, China's at $7, Canada is at about $40, and the Eurozone roughly $150. For Indian exporters, this rule was a lifeline. A sari, a hand-carved toy, even a single book, all could reach an American buyer quickly and cheaply. But that door is now closing. From August 29, the exemption no longer applies. India Post has suspended most parcels to the US. Exporters may now have to turn to private couriers at several times the cost. The Trump administration says the old system was abused, that it hurt American businesses and even allowed dangerous goods like fentanyl precursors to slip through. Fentanyl is the synthetic opioid behind nearly thousands of US deaths in a single year. So what happens next? And what does this mean for small exporters in India? And is there any way to adapt? To discuss this, we're joined by Movin Jain, co-founder of Skydo, a platform that helps Indian exporters get paid faster and at a lower cost. Welcome, Movin, to In Focus.
Thanks, Anupama. Thank you for inviting me.
Movin, before we get into policy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do with exporters through Skydo?
Absolutely. Srivatsan, my co-founder, and I started Skydo about 4 years back. I've been working with startups for the last more than a decade, and have also worked at a few fintech companies, including PhonePe, and decided to come together with Srivatsan, who's run his family business of exports for many years, and faced a lot of the problems that small and medium businesses in India face while exporting, to build a payment platform for these small and medium businesses who are running export businesses from India. So what Skydo does is help these businesses receive their money from overseas, from their clients in the US, UK, Europe, and many other countries, seamlessly and at a very low and transparent cost. There are typically several costs, including forex conversion, where there is not a lot of transparency in the market before we entered, and we have tried to bring that transparency for these small and medium businesses who typically do not have a lot of alternatives to get great service from banks or to negotiate great rates with banks. So we bring that transparency and seamlessness to them, which I think, given UPI, we've all become familiar with as consumers. But for these small and medium businesses, life hasn't really changed in the last 10, 20 years. So that's what we are trying to do.
So it looks like Bipin, your co-founder, as well as the kind of work you guys do with small and medium-sized businesses, you kind of really have a pulse for what's going on in the ground, in a sense. For listeners who are kind of new to this, what exactly is the de minimis exemption, which means too small to matter in Latin, of course? And why was it so important for these small and medium-sized businesses and even online sellers?
Given what has happened over the last, I would say, 20 odd years in terms of the growth of e-commerce, platforms like Amazon and several others, Shopify, even Walmart has its own e-commerce arm. given the growth of all of this, exports has also sort of overlapped with e-commerce, and a lot of exporters worldwide, or a lot of goods manufacturers worldwide, have sort of figured out that they can actually sell globally using these platforms. So imagine a small, let's say, stationery manufacturer in Chennai trying to access global markets through Amazon.com.
Right.
Amazon actually has a full-fledged team in India taking care of this kind of a business, because it's also great business for them. The same diary that this manufacturer might be able to sell at, say, 200 rupees in India, they might be able to sell the same thing for $20 in the US. So it's almost a 10x pricing difference. Now, to access those markets, of course, there are several costs and several compliances, several responsibilities that you have to adhere to, including the RBI, which wants the money to move to India in a certain way, and certain money laundering and other guidelines to be followed. And then you have to go through certain banks or fintechs like Skydo. Amazon and other such platforms will have their own fees, their own rules and regulations. You have to pay your logistics partner like a DHL or a Blue Dart and so on. After you pay all of these costs, you still make very good margins on this kind of a business. So this has really picked up in the last 20 odd years. In China, this has become a few $100 billion over the last 10 years. And on the back of that success, I think the common thesis in a lot of Indian small businesses' minds is that we could also do something like this in India. And a lot of them have actually taken this initiative and built businesses. Some of them are still small. Some of them are decently sized. Some are even large sized. So you now see a lot of these Indian businesses scattered throughout the country, particularly clustered around a few cities like Jaipur, Delhi, Chennai, Panipat, and so on.
And these businesses, they're kind of taking advantage of this limit, right, that the US has, which is about $800, and that is duty-free that you can actually sell. So can you explain that a little bit, how these businesses have seen an opportunity in that?
Absolutely. So when you're an Indian business trying to sell on a global marketplace or to global consumers, you have two options for making the logistics work. One is a model where you ship the goods in bulk to a marketplace like Amazon and put the goods in their warehouse, and then let Amazon sort of ship individually to consumers as they keep buying. Right. Or the other is you ship individually to consumers from India itself. Right. And the second one is usually done through India Post or couriers, because you want to, you want the goods to reach fast. So the sea route is typically not the right, way for shipping such goods. If you're shipping them in bulk, then the sea route is typically more preferred, and it's also more economical. So a lot of these small sellers, firstly, they're not doing so much business that they can use the sea route and make up a full container. So they're forced to use the second route, which is ship individually. Secondly, when you're shipping individually, of course, time matters, cost matters, and most of the shipments happen to be of a very small value, say $50, $100, $200. So most of them happen to be below the de minimis threshold of $800 that the US has. And so, of course, then they're not liable to, declare the type of goods, the category, HSN codes. They're not liable to pay any duties. They're not liable to do all of that paperwork that is required for larger shipments, which works out really well for these small businesses who are exporting around the world from India.
So that's actually important. It's like very little paperwork, right? And it kind of basically smoothens the whole process. And also you have that flexibility of small as well as large amount. Like $800 is actually a big amount, right? Which are the kind of Indian businesses that are affected most here? Now, India Post said that it is suspending most parcels to the US, which is a mode that you said that most of these operators around these clusters actually sold to from August 25th onwards. So India Post has said, we are not going to be sending parcels to the US. Why did that happen? And what has been the immediate effect on exporters of this?
Given the recent geopolitical developments, including the 25% tariff on India and then the 25% additional penalty that the US president has been talking about, it became applicable from 29th August 2025. So given that that was about to happen and had been announced, and it was all of a sudden, just a few days back is when the decision was made, and most businesses, most platforms did not expect that it will be this extreme. So companies like India Post, which are running a logistics service, ultimately some of the responsibility for paying these tariffs, paying this extra 50%. And by the way, this 50% is on top of the other existing duties, which because of the de minimis exemption were exempt on parcels below $800. But now even those are applicable.
Wow.
So those will be 5 to 10% depending on which category it is. And then there is an additional 50% on top, right? So all of that tariff duty now needs to be paid in most cases by this shipping company. So India Post has now the responsibility of making payments for these tariffs.
There's also some difference between personal packages and packages being sent by businesses, right? That's all. There's also that difference. But yeah, I'll leave that to you as you explain things.
Absolutely. So earlier, given the exemption, you did not even have to declare whether a package is personal or for business. And even if you miscategorized something, it was okay. Nobody was really monitoring because it didn't matter. The US government was not making revenue from these things anymore. So there was no point in monitoring whether something is actually personal or for business. But now, given the exemption is gone, there is going to be a lot more scrutiny, and miscategorization is going to be a offense that is going to be tracked and punished. Because the US government could actually lose revenue now. So their revenue department, their tax department would actually be monitoring all of this and making sure nothing is misdeclared and all the relevant tariffs and duties are being paid. Now, for a shipping company, this is significant additional responsibility, not financially, because they will ultimately need to recover it from their customer. So the Indian exporter who's shipping this will ultimately, unfortunately, have to pay all of this. But a company like India Post still needs to take that money and pay it to the US government, to the relevant department, in an itemized way against each item. They need to know how to make this payment. They need to make sure they're complying with each and every rule and so on. So all of that needs a lot of technology and infrastructure and a lot of operational setup for which there hasn't been enough time since this announcement got made.
And also, there's not been that much clarity from the US as well, right, about the process,
Exactly.
Which is why so many countries have basically disbanded this service.
Exactly. Now, so from a operational perspective, it seems that India Post does not feel ready to be able to comply with all of this, given that there is very little clarity from the US authorities about how to do this. And even from a business perspective, I believe that given the volume of shipments is likely to decline, given that a lot of exporters will need some time to figure out what are the alternate markets in which they want to sell, whether this business still makes sense for them, etc. They also believe that there will be a lot of disruption in demand, which is probably why they just took a business decision to not continue this for now. I believe that as the dust settles and as companies and platforms figure out what's the way around and what do they now need to do in this new regime, at some point these services will start coming back up. But of course, it's your guess versus mine about when that happens. But as of now, they've decided to stop this because they just don't know how to comply with this new regime.
Yeah. What are the kind of Indian exporters that are most affected here? I mean, you did kind of start by telling us about these little clusters. Could you give us a little more color and details? Could you possibly an example of a kind of business that relied on this exemption?
Absolutely. So India's manufacturing strength, as we've learned over the last few years, lies in high variety, low volume items.
Okay.
We are not as great as China at manufacturing high volume, low variety. So given that, and given our cultural heritage and what all things we are good at and what all we've learned from our past, we are able to manufacture things like handicraft, textile, all kinds of fashion, particularly ethnic, but even global fashion. All of this is something that India is very, very good at. And then there are machine tools, there are automobile components, which is what my co-founder used to, do in his business, and so on. So these are some categories which India is very good at. There are a few other categories like pharma, etc., which are also, big export categories. Not all of these categories, by the way, are affected by the tariffs. Pharma, for example, is exempted. But most of these categories like handicraft, textile, etc. are affected. So, for
But
example,
I'm talking about the de minimis bit over here, right? So,
Yeah.
which is affected both by the tariff as well as by the additional duties that some
Exactly.
of these things. Okay.
Exactly. So now, for example, there is a lot of garments and textile manufacturing that happens in Tirupur, and almost everybody there exports. Similarly, in Jaipur, there is a lot of handicraft. In Panipat, there's a lot of handicraft, carpets, rugs. In Moradabad, there's a lot of furniture. So all of these clusters will now get affected by this, removal of this exemption.
And they used to basically then sell directly to customers who ordered to them, small, like you're saying, a low volume products. When you're talking about Tirupur, obviously we're talking about more higher volume, which was probably shipped by sea. But when you're talking about the handicrafts and, the maybe hand woven textiles and things like that, you're talking about smaller volume sellers here.
Absolutely. I think it's a mix of both. You're right that, a lot of large exporters in Tirupur might be doing bulk shipping, but there are also enough small and micro exporters in the city as well. But overall, I think the moment a business gets into export, they're obviously trying to maximize their opportunities. So one of the ways is to sell to consumers directly by having your own website or Shopify store. The other is to go onto Amazon.com and list your products and sell via Amazon. In which case, you can either ship in bulk or ship individually. Again, when you're small, there's no bulk to ship.
Right.
You have very little demand, so you ship individually. But then the third way is you actually tie up with some retailer in the US. Let's say you become a supplier of Walmart. Now, that's a longer process, and not every company can become a supplier of Walmart. But in that case, then you start doing bulk shipping, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of exporters in Tirupur might be selling to a Zara, H&M, and so on. So that would be the bulk shipping use case. And of course, that is not exempt under the de minimis exemption because the value would be higher. But for a lot of small businesses, let's say somebody making an annual revenue of a few lakhs or even, say up to 10, 20 crores, my guess is that most of their shipments would be individual shipments.
Now, the Trump administration has also brought out this point about fairness for American businesses. And they've also spoken about stopping fentanyl and other dangerous goods slipping through parcels. Reuters did this very extensive reportage last year where the reporters in the US actually managed to source fentanyl precursors, which are the raw materials, from places in China, and they get hidden in parcels and get sold in the US. How do you see that argument, especially from the perspective of Indian exporters who are now caught in the middle? Of course, India was also kind of red flagged in this, in terms of, some sellers of precursors from India also being kind of highlighted in one of the reports published earlier this year. So from the perspective of Indian exporters, what kind of difficulty they face because of all these different reasons for removal of this exemption?
I think it's quite unfortunate that Indian exporters got caught in this crossfire where, the main problem with respect to fentanyl and its precursors was actually originating from China. The action taken by the US is actually far more than what was required to solve just that problem. Of course, it's a little difficult for us to, sitting here, think about what kind of reasons and arguments they might have gone through before taking this decision. But it does feel a little bit of an overreach, and it's absolutely unfortunate for Indian businesses that this happened. And we've been speaking to a lot of Skydo customers who are now in this situation where they have to understand what to do with their business going forward and how to absorb these costs and so on. So and it's really unfortunate that this problem, which originated in between two other countries and had not much to do with India. I think a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned exporters who are completely compliant with everything, not doing anything illegal, and just want to do business, have been caught in this crossfire and are deeply affected by this, and now have to think of other alternatives.
What are businesses doing right now to cope? Are there any practical workarounds? You said you've been talking to some of your customers. Are they looking at other financial tools that can probably soften the blow? What are they doing now to kind of manage this situation?
We've seen quite a few creative ideas floating around, and some businesses have actually started implementing some of them, and others are still thinking about it and trying to finalize their strategy. But I think one of the key things that exporters are thinking about is geographical, diversification. Because US is such a large market, and all other markets kind of, dwarf in front of the US in terms of dollar value. A lot of small exporters, it just doesn't make sense for them to diversify geographically when they're small. That's what was happening earlier. Now, in this new world, where this exemption has gone and, there is an additional 50% tariff, of course, that argument is shifting. And even for a small exporter now, it makes a lot more sense to diversify. These people would have done that diversification maybe when they reached a certain scale. But now they've just had to, prepone that plan and prioritize diversification above a lot of other things, because it has become a, question of survival.
And when you say diversification, which are the, other countries that they're probably looking at?
So a lot of businesses are looking at markets similar to the US. So Western countries like UK, Canada, Europe. Some are even looking at Australia and then the Middle East. Because the dynamics with respect to currency and conversion is similar, in the sense that there's, like, if you sell to the UK, the currency is very rich again. So there is some margin available. And then there's a lot of Indian diaspora, so some products that cater particularly to those people. Again, there's a lot of demand in these countries. Canada particularly is culturally very similar to the US.
Right.
And still has the de minimis exemption. I don't remember the exact threshold of Canada, but their tariffs are also low, because of which, it still makes a lot of business sense to, do business with Canada. A lot of these, small businesses who were earlier not even thinking about other countries now are forced to think about that. And I think there are some good options available. UK, UAE, so we have a free trade agreement with almost each of these countries. I think with the UK, it is, in the works and should be live soon. With UAE and Australia, we already have a free trade agreement. And of course, the Indian government will now also react and start, creating more free trade agreements with other countries as well. I think one sort of contrarian idea that I've heard from some people, which they are trying out, is within South Asia, trade within South Asia. So selling to countries like Indonesia and so on. I think countries like China do a lot of that trade, but India has been behind. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to discover something new. So overall, that's how people are thinking about geographical diversification.
It might just have to be more of a volumes game now, right? Given that obviously the currencies or the prices that they charge cannot be as high as they possibly charged a US customer. So in that sense, also things may change, right?
Yes, that's likely. Although it's a little difficult to comment, and in some categories, it might be the opposite as well, because the US also has a lot of supply, given the dynamic that the US is the largest market. So almost everyone wants to sell to the US. Whereas if you go to an Australia, they may actually not have a lot of supply, so they may not be spoiled for choice, and because of which they might be actually willing to pay higher. So in some categories, that might play out.
Yeah, like the US was an easy market for everybody, all competitors from around the world to actually consider. So now, as everybody possibly, but everybody's again going to be diversifying into these same markets. So that's going to be again a tough moment for everybody. If you are a small Indian exporter listening to this, what would you tell them? What would you advise them? How should they prepare for this new environment and stay competitive?
I think there are 3 to 4 axes on which I would suggest they think about. One is geographical diversification, which we already covered. There is also operational leanness, which is reduce your costs as much as possible. Try to be lean. And one of the things there which we've seen, a lot of small businesses ignore in the beginning is GST refunds. Exports, doesn't qualify for GST, which means that you don't have to firstly charge any GST on your sales. Secondly, if you're export only, then you can also get refunds on your inputs, on your input costs.
Okay.
But that needs some paperwork, and a lot of small businesses ignore that. So that's one thing that at Skydo we've been helping them with, which is give them the FIRC, which is required for GST refunds. This straight away is 5 to 10%, or depending on the category, even higher saving in cost. Then there is FX cost, which again Skydo helps with. And then I'm sure there will also be a lot of push and pull in cost of raw material and cost of labor, etc. Given this new universe, everybody has to deal with it. The whole of India has to deal with it. So which means that a lot of costs will get readjusted or renegotiated, and a lot of that game will start shifting in the value chain. So that's the other thing that exporters seem to be trying.
As I read the news every day, and then I'm trying to keep up with what's going on. You've been to some of the premier educational institutes in the country, IIT, IIM, and case studies form such a huge part of the whole learning experience. Do you think there's going to be lots to learn from this whole period of that has started earlier this year? What is your expectation going forward? Are we going to ever be prepared enough to the things that are going to be thrown at us, given what's going on globally, politically, trade-wise, tariffs?
Yeah, excellent point. I think what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. So I am a firm believer of that, and I don't think this will kill us. This is only going to help us prepare for even worse things to come. And worse things have happened in the history of the country and in the history of Indian economy, right? So I don't think this is, one of the bigger blows. I think it is something that Indian businesses will over time figure out how to work with. In fact, to some extent, it might actually help us realize that we were too dependent on somebody that we shouldn't have been so dependent on, and will help us, plan our lives better and, build geopolitical relations as well as trade relations with other countries that matter a lot in the global economy. And I think the world is also, learning and working with this new way
world
in which
order.
the US, this new world order and this new way in which the US is managing its international relations. So I think to a lot of extent, India is also not alone. So I would say that what happens in the future, while you and I cannot tell today, it will definitely be interesting and definitely be a great case study to, read to our kids a few years down the line. But I would say that I'm quite positive. I'm quite optimistic that Indian business people have, figured such things out, or even bigger things out in the past. So I don't think that this will be such a deadly blow.
Well, I guess it helps to always end on an optimistic note. And I'm glad you kind of waved that flag over here, because every day when I pick up the paper, I don't know, it's not like my life is getting affected immediately, but still, to kind of see this nerve-wracking news and changes that's happening all around us. I just hope things move out of this kind of tempest into maybe softer waters pretty soon. But
likewise, I'm with you and hope the same.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Movin. I really appreciate you joining us today and explaining everything so patiently to our listeners. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Anupama, for having me, and have a great day.